I keep getting white people telling me that I'm racist against whites, and I get so confused because you can't be racist to white people. Not only do I not have the social power in order to enact racism on a systemic level, but when we're talking about white people and white supremacy and white privilege, we're talking about white people as an entity, as a player and actor within white supremacy and those who benefit from white privilege. We're not talking about it on a personal, individual level in their personhood necessarily.
Definition of racism: prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group. Most of your videos exhibit clear prejudice, discrimination, and antagonism towards white people. The fact that your content does not violate TikTok's hate speech guidelines should prove exactly who has the social power: you. Defining racism as the power to enact discrimination systemically is convenient, fallacious, and rationalizes the irrational. Let's examine your thesis with a thought experiment. Imagine a white supremacist in Somalia, Ethiopia, or Nigeria. Would he magically stop being a racist? Would it be okay for him to use disgusting racial slurs with impunity? What about Honduras, which has the lowest white population in the world, 1%? Would the change of location alter his essential nature and personality, transform his hatred, or make it socially acceptable? Merely because the governments, media, and cultures of the nations involved are not dominated by whites? And you do have the power to enact your spiteful, genocidal bigotry. Are you ignoring how completely leftism is entrenched in the power structures of Western civilization? The left controls all the most important American institutions: public schools, college campuses, corporations, big tech, online distributors, nearly every social media platform, almost every last news outlet, printed, televised, online, local, national, and international, the medical and pharmacological industries, psychological, psychiatric, and medical associations, the Senate, the presidency, most of the country's state legislatures, municipal governments of the cities, the World Economic Forum, and you just lost the House majority. But you cling with the maniacal desperation of a drowning man to the idea that you are the resistance, instead of realizing that you are the oppressors. You have over 571,000 followers with millions of views. Even blindly ignoring the social power you exercise daily, then that fact must surely confirm that what I have just said is true. At least have the integrity to admit that you are able to enact infinitely more systemic influence than a no-name white boy like me. By your own definition, racism equals discrimination plus power. You are the racist, and it's impossible for me to be. Do you know what the weakest point is of wokeness? To win arguments, for your basic statements to make sense at all, is necessary to redefine words: women, recession, fascism, and yes, racism. But activists lobbying and applying pressure to add or change definitions in mainstream dictionaries does not change the meaning. It proves only how arbitrary the dictionary is. A definition is not defined by transitory alteration to pixels on a screen. If Merriam-Webster is able to change definitions by popular demand, then they can always change it back to meet the mob's whims. A word's true meaning is characterized by its etymology in linguistics. The former is the history of a word's meaning as it is defined through time, the modern interpretation in the context of its evolution. The latter is the study of the word itself, or better still, how people understand it. A linguist defines a word quite simply: if I say it and you understand, it's a word. Changing the definition of racism to make it conform with your radical ideology, given your argument makes no sense otherwise, does nothing to change the meaning. Leftists control the institutions, but are still a minority faction, particularly when thinking globally. Your definition of racism is therefore rendered useless. Yes, words evolve, but there is a vital difference between the semantical changes which evolve alongside the culture which uses word and hijacking definitions by minority consensus. If racism can be so arbitrarily redefined to fill the plot holes of your origami ideology, then constantly changing definitions would put language in such a state of flux as to be rendered nonsensical or not language at all. The most intelligent of the woke devourers cynically know that that's just the point. Through words, you seek to control thought, behavior, lives, and through controlling lives, you seek global domination. Am I melodramatic in calling your rhetoric genocidal? Google the 10 stages of genocide. Read some historical texts, starting with William Schreier's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. You might have more in common with genocidalists than you think. For over 25 years, I've studied history with an emphasis on the totalitarian nations of the 20th century, more specifically acts of genocide. When a regime is building up to mass murder, its citizens discuss that demographic exactly how you speak about white folks. You said it's not about looking at an individual's personhood. Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao would have agreed. Stalin famously said, quote, "The death of one man is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic." Have you ever heard of the Umayyad conquest of Hispania? In 711 AD, Tariq ibn Zayd invaded modern Spain, leading an army of indigenous Berbers who were as black as they come. He conquered as far north as today's southern France. Enemy combatants, those who refused conversion to Islam, and many other Europeans were enslaved, sold south across the Mediterranean to labor for their African masters. Some form of the Arab slave trade continued in that region until the expulsion of the Moors began in 1492, lasting 781 years compared to 246 in America. Nearly 8 centuries before Columbus ever sailed, Islamics were colonizing. Their slave trade, mostly African slaves, lasted 1,300 years with more brutality than America's. Would you dare talk about the Arabic cultures and peoples as you do about white folks? Dare demand reparations? Do you have the principle to apply the same logic? Declare that they demonize themselves, or just make excuses and rationalizations to maintain your hateful ideology? Did you know Africans enslave each other to this day? Where do you think we bought slaves from? Do you have the integrity to simply admit that you are incorrect, misguided, that you bought into the wrong batch of bullshit? It's liberating. You legitimize your argument by mentioning Aimé Césaire, Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a notorious pedophile, Frantz Fanon, Dr. de Groy, and others. They say racism has become tangible. True, but racism, what had been a doddery, cancerous, dying old man, had renewed life breathed into him by people who view everything through the lens of race, i.e. woke racists. You would be foaming at the mouth with complete rabid rage if a class of white academics created an intelligentsia around profiling behaviors, intentions, psychology, and motives of black folk. How is this any different? I noticed most that you proffered but a single citation from one author, not even citing the text from which it was derived. You say, "Don't take our word for it," as if you and said thinkers are synonymous. Very telling. It suggests that you have not had an original thought for some time. Can you name 3 texts by each author? I won't know if you Googled it, but you will. Everyone is influenced by others, especially those of us who spend much of our time studying, but you missed the point. Independent thinkers read Sartre's Nausea and mull it over. The point is to digest the information, accept its influence, and make your own conclusions. Not take every word on the page as gospel. You were trained to memorize and repeat. Your system of beliefs was fed to you. You never bothered to consider that it doesn't matter how intelligent, influential, and renowned someone is, he can be wrong. Frantz Fanon wrote The Wretched of the Earth in 1961. Do you really believe that the truth as he saw it then would coincide with the truth as he would see it if he were born in the 1980s? His ideas are outdated, face it. Memorizing and parroting is not intelligence. The ability to digest the information into ideas of your own does. But what do I know? I'm just some punk who cares.